All right, so our topic for today, uh, child and adolescent development. And so we want to just review some basic concepts as it relates to child development, what to look for and what to look out for at what age. All right. And our objectives for this particular training is to identify important developmental tasks that serve as a framework for learning and skill acquisition. We want to place challenges and expectations and behavior within a developmental framework to avoid common mistakes and encourage outcome based strategies. And then lastly, we want to be able to anticipate and assist persons served in preparing for challenges at specific developmental critical periods. All right. And the various stages of child and adolescent development that we want to look at are broken down into 6 categories. And so we want to look at infant and toddlers from ages 0 to 2. We'll review early childhood, ages 3 to 5, middle to late childhood, ages 6 to 11, early teens or our preteens, however you want to call it, from 12 to 14, our teens ages 15 to 17, and then lastly our young adults ages 18 to 20. Okay. And as we go in through each of these stages, we want to look at 4 specific areas: social development, cognitive and language development, emotional development, and physical development. And so we're going to look at those 4 categories with each of these stages that we take a look at. All right. And so first, when we consider our infants and toddlers on a social development piece, this is where we're primarily focused on things like attachment and person permanence. Right. We talked about this kind of casually yesterday, talking about simply how infant, cry to get their needs met. Right. And one of those needs involves attachment. Right. And so there's times when there's no physical need that the infant or toddler will have other than wanting to have that time and that connection with their caregiver, parent, or what have you. And so during that period, they're really developing that attachment and finding that comfort in those around them. Cognitive and language development, well, at that age, infants and toddlers are going to be limited to, short, maybe some multi-word sentences, right? They're at the formative stages of learning and building their language and building their vocabulary, right? So they're going to be pretty limited in what they can communicate verbally to us as it relates to what their needs may be. Okay, or what they may be feeling. Emotional development, learning to trust others to satisfy their needs, right? Again, we've talked about this and how, babies, toddlers, they can do very little for themselves. And so they are heavily dependent on those who care for them to provide and meet those needs that they have, be it being fed, changed, in many cases clothed, right? As kids get on towards that toddler stage, they begin to be a little bit more independent, maybe able to do a few things on their own, but they still need some supports or many supports. Physical development, we begin to see motor skill development, right? So we start to see our infants and toddlers begin to crawl, walk. We see them, building that muscular ability to sit and hold themselves up and stand, or even climb steps, right? And the more those motor skills develop, the more they seem to get into, right? Now, some of the challenges and expectations that we may find or see in that age range of our infants and toddlers is keeping them safe is the primary task, right? Because we talk about things like those motor skills. That's why at that age it's not uncommon for us to see ourselves childproofing the house, right? We've got socket covers to keep them out of the putting things into the wall sockets. You may have locks on the cabinets to make sure that they can't get a hold of, maybe cleaning materials. or you may just choose to have those cleaning materials up on high shelves that are out of reach. But in any case, when they start those motor skills of developing, we have to be mindful of the things that they have access to, because they are still learning and they don't necessarily know what's good and what can be bad for them. Attachment and bonding are important experiences. And so, just kind of considering the whole landscape of foster care, uh, you know, children who, are at this age and stage and pulled from the home may have some challenges when it comes to attachment and bonding, because they may miss out on that opportunity with their parents during this critical period. And so that becomes really important, especially during your visitations and things like that. If trauma is experienced, it will not be coded linguistically. So again, remember, we mentioned that they have limited language skills. So at that age, infants, toddlers aren't able to effectively communicate to us what they may be feeling as it relates to the experiences that they are having. We simply may only observe that through them crying, or their actions, their behaviors, right? And then no screen time. Hopefully, we don't have any infants and toddlers that are having too much screen time, but in this day and age with technology, it is becoming more commonplace, and it's not uncommon for the screen to be our in-house babysitter, right? But we do want to be mindful of that, because they are absorbing, that information and processing that information, and we want to be mindful of what they're receiving, what's going in, how it's being processed, and how that could impact them down the line as they start to transition through these other stages that we'll get into. Early childhood, ages 3 to 5 years old. All right, so social development, we're looking at things like acceptance of responsibility, right? How many of us have had encounters with 3 to 5 year olds who may inadvertently break something, and we go to ask them what happened, and their response may be something as simple as, I don't know. And then you see what's happening, you're like, hey, how'd that get broke? I don't know. You didn't do that? No, I didn't do that, right? So getting them at that age to begin to accept responsibility, and not necessarily feel like they can't take responsibility or ownership for the actions that they take, right? Cognitive and language development. So concepts of measurement, classes, collections, such as colors, animals, shapes, numbers, things like that. We start to see the kids at that age beginning to learn those things. And, this is critical to helping them begin to learn and understand the world around them, right? Emotional development, the need for increased independence and mobility. So, how many of us have had that 3 to 5 year old, want to do a lot more for themselves? Being able, especially in that tail end, maybe, being able to dress themselves more. They may start to enter in that phase where they actually want, not only are they wanting to dress themselves, they may want to even pick out their clothing, right? Pick out their outfit. So involving them in that process, right? And so embracing those areas where they may have or desire that need for increased independence, and guiding them through that, right? Because that's what we want as they continue to go through these ages and stages of development. We want them to gain independence. Now, the challenge can be at that age is with certain tasks, they may struggle with it. And there may be times where we're motivated to jump in and do it for them, right? And so sometimes we have to be mindful to resist that urge, or maybe in certain circumstances give ourselves a little bit more time, so we have that extra time needed to give them the time that they need to work through a challenging task. Physical development. So not only are they developing those gross motor skills, we now begin to see them develop some fine motor skills, such as unlocking doors. Um, I recall having a friend of ours who had two, matter of fact, I think they had two in this same stage at the same time. One, kind of closer to the tail end, closer to that 5 year old age, and one, closer to the 3 year old age. And so, yeah, let's just, for the sake of the example, call it a 3 year old girl and a 5 year old boy. And mom is in the kitchen preparing lunch or something like that, I think. And the daughter comes in and is kind of watching, playing around, and mom asks her daughter, "Hey, where's your brother?" And lo and behold, the brother at this point has gone and unlocked the door and went out into the front yard and is just exploring and having a good old time. And so just kind of reinforces the need to be aware of their abilities to unlock doors, and really educating them, right, on the importance of not just taking it upon themselves, because that goes hand in hand with that independence piece, right? He wanted to go outside, was curious, but didn't bother to ask or even, tell his mom that he wanted to go outside or was going outside. And so, thankfully all was well and nothing happened. But, depending on where you are, that could be a pretty dangerous thing. Some challenges and expectations for our 3 to 5 year olds is that the child discovers autonomy and they learn that the word no works both ways, right? So at this stage, they may have gotten accustomed to hearing us tell them no a couple of times, and they explore and say, I wonder if I can try that, right? And so we may tell them to do something, maybe tell them to go prepare themselves to get ready for bed or for a bath or for dinner, and they may be doing something else that they want to do and don't want to pull away from that. And so they begin to learn that I can start saying no, right? And so helping them to navigate that and understand when it's appropriate to say no and when it's not as appropriate to do so. Uh, Learning to share and learning to lose at games is a challenge. Um, I must admit, it's sad to say that, that was a challenge for me, even past that age. Used to play Monopoly with my grandmother, and she used to be really good at it. And it didn't feel good losing, uh, because she used to seem to beat everybody at Monopoly. But that's common at this 3 to 5 year old age. They, don't necessarily understand how to be a good loser, or what's a better phrase, but they don't know, they don't, haven't learned how to accept that I'm not going to win at everything, or I'm not going to win all the time. There are times when someone may outperform me or do better at something, and I have to be okay with that. Problems with impulse control, right? Language development can often emerge at this time as well. So if I am struggling with my language at this 3 to 5 year old age, and I'm not really building a solid foundation from a vocabulary standpoint, I may find myself frustrated at times when I'm not able to verbalize how I'm feeling or why I might be feeling a particular way. And that may come out in anger and frustration and demonstrate or display itself through impulse control or lack thereof. Again, it's kind of, I've already touched on this, but at that age, they are developing those fine motor skills, developing a little bit more independence, and we may give them grounds for that independence, i.e., getting themselves together, dressing themselves, tying their shoes. But on days or in times when we may be behind schedule, running a little bit late, it's very easy for us to just grab and go and do what it is that we need to do for them, rather than letting them do it for themselves, to save time. But in doing that, we may very well be limiting their opportunities to continue to develop in those various areas. And it could manifest and show itself as a problem later on down the line. Middle to late childhood. All right, so our middle to late childhood, from a social development standpoint, we are looking at the importance of same gender peers. And so, if some of you can think back and remember and recall, being in school during this stage, roughly what, grades, maybe first grade through about fifth grade or so. Especially as you go through each grade, you found yourself, hanging more with your peers that were the same gender as you. So, boys were oftentimes playing together, maybe playing tag or some sport, and the girls may, be off to themselves playing their own games, having their conversations, but more often than not, the boys, kind of hung out with the boys, girls hung with the girls. And it wasn't as much intermingling, if you would, at that age. You kind of were just learning more about yourself, right? And so we had more of those same gender peer social groups and gatherings. From a cognitive and language development standpoint, we see our children at that age starting to apply rules governing grammar and differences in those rules. So you think about some of the words that we use that sound the same but have different meanings. So for example, we have three versions of there. So there, as in I'm over there, THERE. Their home, as in I'm going to their home, someone else's home, THEIR. And what's the third one that I'm missing? I feel like I'm missing one. I know it's more than just two. Somebody help me out. Oh, they are. They, THEY apostrophe RE. There. They are going to the movies, right? And so we have those three different variations. And depending on how, someone is developing from a language standpoint, all three of those can sound very much the same. And so we have to kind of learn, or, children that age are learning to understand context and how that context is, governing which there we're talking about. And there's other examples of that, right? Who knew the English language could be so complex, right? But kids are learning that. Additionally, beyond just learning, formal language, kids are having all kinds of slang terms, and they have their own social language that they are using with their peers. And so learning how to understand and navigate that as well can be a challenge, especially at this age where sometimes they're using their social group language in formal settings, in their writings in schools and whatnot. So that can be a bit of a challenge at that age. And, we want to help them navigate that and understand, what settings require or are appropriate for certain said language. Emotional development, we see a development of moral reasoning, right? So at this age, I'm starting to make connections with those around me, stronger connections, if you will. And I'm starting to pay attention to the feelings and emotions of those around me, right? And so while I may still be very focused on me and my emotions and my feelings, I'm becoming a little bit more aware of how what I say or do may impact those that are around me, okay? Physical development, we see kids at this age starting to develop a little bit more muscle mass and strength. And we definitely will begin to see that muscle mass and strength start to we start to see more of a gap between boys and girls, right? So boys are starting to develop at a much uh, faster rate from a muscle mass and strength standpoint, especially as we get to the later part of that childhood cycle from 6 to 11. Early on, maybe 6 through 8, boys and girls are, pretty much about the same size, may have similar muscle mass and strength. But as they start to get further and further along this stage, we start to see a separation. Challenges and expectations. So we begin to see symbolic thinking and communication congruence, possibly becoming confusing for children during these years. All right, and so the example is lying or yes sirring. Right, so you tell a kid to do something and they say, yeah, sure, right? But they have zero intentions on doing what they just said yes to. They, however, do understand and know that saying yes is the path to least resistance. And so if I just say yes, I can continue on doing what I am doing right now. And, it'll buy me some time. And at the very least, it will, keep me from prolonging this exchange at that moment. But what they don't necessarily process and understand is times where that can be problematic and how it could affect and impact others, right? And so we want to help them through that. We want to help them process that and, understand the importance of letting their yes be yes and their no be no, right? Executive functioning and specific learning challenges are often identified around this stage as well. So, and this is, really kind of in that middle phase. So when we talk about 3rd and 4th grade, we're talking about somewhere around that 9 or 8 to 10-year-old range where we're able to see better some of the gaps that may exist as it pertains to executive functioning and other learning challenges that children may be facing at that age. Whereas earlier on, it can be a little bit challenging and difficult to make those observations. But when they are at this age range of 6 to 11, and specifically, ages 8 to 10, those challenges become a little bit more distinct and more noticeable. All right. The child learns that life is unfair and that authority can be flawed. So at this age, kids are well into their, academic career at school, and they're learning that, some of the rules that I have at school are different than the rules that I may have at home. And they have to juggle that, right? Because I'm at school, I have one set of rules at school, and I may have another set of rules at home. Who do I listen to, right? Both my parents and, those at school, my teachers and administration there, they are all in positions of authority. But, how do I know how to, properly navigate that and, how to follow those rules, specifically when some of those rules may conflict with each other? Right? Just kind of thinking about bullying, for example. And unfortunately, it's a big thing that a lot of kids face. And let's say I'm being bullied at school. Well, the school is going to be very likely to tell me to, let my teacher and other adults at the school know and inform them about it, rather than taking it in my own hands to hit back or to defend myself in whatever type of way I might see fit to try to stop the bullying. And that might be the way that I decide as a child to respond to that bullying, to try to stop the bullying, may be okay at home. And my parents might be okay with what I did, but the school is saying, no, that's not how we do that, right? Well, kids have to navigate that. They have to, and they may find that they may struggle with those conflicts at times. And so it's up to us to, in that particular instance, to work with the school and to work with our children to help them to understand how to more effectively navigate the expectations and more specifically the rules that may be set in place for them in those two different locations and how to juggle that difference. Early teens, ages 12 to 14. Right, so ages 12 to 14, from a social development standpoint, we're looking at the emergence of gender identity. Right, now in this day and age, with technology kind of being what it is, we definitely see a lot more of this emergence of gender identity happening at far earlier ages and stages, simply because kids are exposed to a lot more in social media and film and music, things of that nature. With that exposure happening a lot earlier, we may very well see this emergence of gender identity occurring in some instances far earlier than 12 to 14. But this is the more typical range where we're starting to see that emergence of gender identity, primarily because let's look at it at this stage and age. This is where kids are starting to go through puberty, or more kids are beginning to go through puberty at this age. And so we start to see that physical development occurring, where there are certain differences. So young men at this age, some may start to feel their body changing in ways. Some may start to find themselves growing hair in places that they didn't have hair before. Young ladies are starting to develop physically, may start to develop breasts and things like that. And so with these physical developments, kids are starting to see, okay, we're definitely different, right? Even if they didn't already know that. Cognitive and language development. We see the early development of abstract reasoning, such as beginning to think about ideas, right? And so I liken this to the idea of, if I do, then this will occur. So really starting to understand that if-then type of language, right? So being able to begin to work with hypotheticals, potentially, but more specifically, getting a better understanding that there are consequences for our actions. And maybe more specifically, for every action, if you will, there's a reaction, right? And so understanding that when I do X, Y, Z, or ABC, then X, Y, Z occurs. Emotional development, we start to see increased conflict between parents and adolescents. At this age, kids are in full-fledged, desire to be more independent. They're not quite at the age of drive yet, but they are certainly at that age where they feel like they are far more capable of doing a lot more for themselves, feel like they can, be trusted to go out, stay out later, and just be more independent in that sense of, the things that they might do with their peers, and how frequently they may gather with their peers. At this age, again, kids aren't driving quite yet, but in spending more times with their peers, they want more time with their peers without necessarily having supervision. So, they may be more apt to want to go to the malls, parks, or just other areas where they can just gather together. And this is, where we see more of those conflicts, because as parents, we may start to have greater concern over the company that children may be keeping. And so we may look at some of their friends and say, we might have some reservations about certain friends that they want to hang with. And that, is going to unfortunately cause some conflict, because they want to hang with those friends. They're trying to make those new associations, even though they may not at times be the best associations for them to keep. Physical development, the belief that they are the center of attention, right? They are the sun. We are just the planets revolving around them, right? um, yeah, not a whole lot to say about that, outside of the fact that it can be a challenge at times for us as parents and caregivers to have to navigate that space. Because on one hand, you want them to have a certain healthy sense of self pride and self worth, but you don't want them to be overly consumed. But that is a natural part of this phase and stage. Some challenges and expectations that we want to be aware of is that peers begin to have a greater influence than parents. So, we talked about the challenges in the earlier stage where kids are struggling with, the authority figures that they have at school and the authority that they have at home, and seeing how though there's differences that exist there. But their peers at this age are also starting to garner significant influence. So not only do I have the influence of my parents and the influence of those adults in my school setting, but my peers are starting to have a certain influence, and I may begin to want to do some things that my peers are doing, even though they may be things that those authority figures at school or my parents at home and authority figures at home, they might frown upon. Okay, because I want to be cool, I want to fit in, right? How I want to be seen by others becomes very important. This goes back to that aspect of them kind of feeling like they're the center of attention, as well as going through physical development and starting to go through that gender identity process. When we talk about things like puberty, some boys and girls are they're maturing or going through puberty at a different rate and process, and so may not develop the same, and that can impact those relationships in that age and stage, and therefore flow into sometimes kids struggling with that question of, or that idea that how I want to be seen by others, how people perceive me, how they view me is really important. And so I may take I may put a lot of effort and a lot of attention into trying to look my best because I want others to view me as such. And this is a lot more difficult for us nowadays or for our kids nowadays than it might have been for us growing up because of technology. So we think about social media. Just thinking about what are people chasing on these various platforms like Facebook, Instagram. They're chasing likes. They're chasing views, right? And unfortunately, the more likes or views that I have, I equate that in my level of importance, or so I'm more important or more valuable if I have more views or more likes. And that can be a tricky thing, because what we don't account for, or what our kids may not account for at times with social media, is what are people doing on social media? They're putting their best foot forward. I'm going to show you my best possible version of me on social media. That's not necessarily what I look like all the time, but that's the standard that you're pursuing and chasing after. So we want to be able to help our kids navigate that space and understand that as well. Sensitivity to rejection, often rooted in the belief that how I look and act is who I am. So no need to revisit that, kind of already touched on that. Middle school magnifies any challenges in the area of organizational skills. Whoo-wee. Don't I know it? Don't we know it, right? We look at that age range, all we got to do is go and walk into their room, right? It's probably not for most kids, not all, but for most or many in that age range, they're not gonna be keeping the neatest and cleanest rooms. because organization and tidiness is not necessarily the priority at that time outside of what I look when I leave the house, right? As long as I look good when I leave the house, not really concerned with how my bedroom looks. Uh, at least not until I have somebody over, right? If I have my friends coming over, I might, try to tidy up because I want to, again, put my best foot forward. Our teens, ages 15 to 17, okay? With our teens, ages 15 to 17, socially, we're looking at loosely associated groups of couples replacing crowds as the social vehicle. So at this stage, it's not uncommon for our teens to uh, be entering into the dating phase or dating stage, where they are finding those peers and their groups that they are interested in a little bit more than their others. So beginning to make that distinction between a friend and someone that I actually like or have somewhat of a love interest in, if you will. It's funny to watch them at that phase. I think about my son just recently, with his little girlfriend and her birthday coming up, and him just eager to go and grab a few couple of things to give to her for her birthday. At this age, that's normal. That's what they're looking to do. And so they're finding those individuals that they are hanging with and making those distinctions, and wanting to hang out in groups in that manner as opposed to necessarily just hanging out with their friends that they may not have those types of interests in. And let's face it, nobody necessarily wants to be the third wheel, right? And so for that reason, additionally, we may see more of these groups of couples replacing those other types of crowds with our teens. Cognitive and language development, we begin to see sharpened hypothetical, abstract thinking and reasoning. So we talked about the if-then factor, and kids, they're beyond that point at this time. They should hopefully have developed those strong skills and being able to anticipate what the expected outcome will be when they take certain actions. But now, hopefully, they're starting to think more from a hypothetical standpoint of how they can actually start to change some things around them, right? And so in life, we have things that are normal to us or customary to us, but we don't always like how things go. We don't necessarily always think that they should be a certain way. And so at this age, I may start to begin thinking about how things can change, and for them to change, what may be required for those changes to occur. Who has to be involved to make those changes, right? Whereas at the earlier stage, I'm not thinking about all of that. I'm not making those same kinds of observations. And so, I know that I have to coordinate, collaborate, and work with other people now to maybe achieve some of those outcomes or some of those ideas that I might have, right? Bringing our ideas to reality, if you will. Emotional development. So the development of adolescent sexual identity, right? This goes hand in hand kind of with that social development and the groups of couples, right? And so at this stage, and again, kind of going back to the whole social media piece, with kids being exposed to things in the media at a much earlier age, we may see this development of sexual identity earlier than 15 to 17. But this is the more common time frame in which we are likely to begin to see that development in that particular area. Physical development, body image, increasingly important again because they're still developing even more as young men and young ladies, and beginning to be more distinct in that. Boys this age are definitely starting to, if they're athletic or into sports, and therefore maybe working out a bit more, exercising a bit more, they're going to start to develop physically and develop more muscle mass. And for many, that may tie to some of those social relationships and their identity and how they see themselves, as well as how they perceive others viewing them and seeing them. Just kind of think about it, in the way or the light in which we view our athletes nowadays, right? Um, uh, that becomes the unfortunately, at times we see how physically fit some of our athletes are. For some of us, that may become the goal, the thing that we're looking to achieve. I want to look like that. I may not be able to play like them, but what can I do to be physically fit and potentially look like that, right? um, and so at this age, kids are starting to separate and have that kind of diversity in their physical image, and with that putting a little bit more weight on their physical image and what that means to them, as well as what that may mean to others. Some challenges and expectations is that conflict between the safety of being dependent and the desire for autonomy is in full bloom. So at this 15 to 17-year-old range, at this point in time, kids are now driving, right? Or at least able to drive, right? So they're able to go and get their license. For those who are fortunate enough, they may even have a vehicle that they have access to. But guess what? It takes some things to maintain a vehicle. I've got to keep gas in the car. I've got to, the car needs to be insured, right? There's regular maintenance that has to occur on the vehicle. And at 15 to 17, it's not always easy to get a job at that range, maybe at the 16, 17 range, but not everybody is hiring 15-year-olds because, there's restrictions on the hours that they can work, but not just that, they're in school. So the hours that they have available to work are limited, period. So on one hand, if, I'm of age and can drive and I have access to a vehicle, I don't have the liberty or freedom to do any and everything that I want to do with that vehicle, because I may need help and support keeping that vehicle running and operating and on the road for me to even have access to it. So, I have to begin at that age to accept the fact that as independent as I want to be with this vehicle, I still need the support and help of my parents or caregivers with that. And I may not like it when they tell me that I can't have the vehicle or access to the vehicle to do X, Y, Z. Justice and status issues often underpin children who are persistently angry. Kind of goes hand in hand with that previous bullet point of trying to find a balance between independence and or autonomy, while also knowing that I have to be dependent on those that care for me. And understanding that with that, while I may have more privileges, right, I'm also going to have more responsibilities. And I may not necessarily feel like the responsibilities I have, along with the privileges that I have, are fair. At that age, I want more privileges and less responsibility. But the reality is, the more privileges that I have, the more responsibility I'm going to have. And I'm working with my parents at this age, hopefully to begin to understand how to navigate that space when eventually I am on my own. Because right now I have the capacity, ability to lean on and depend on those that are caring for me to support me, help me navigate, help me make sense of the world around me, so that I can make good choices, and really better manage my anger, specifically when things don't necessarily work out the way that I want them to. Okay, or when I think things aren't fair. Vulnerability to depression for teens whose learning difficulties, self control challenges, or attachment skills have not been addressed, maybe in full bloom here, right? Again, if I'm struggling, just learning, and it can be various reasons why I may be struggling, to learn or to develop those cognitive skills that are expected at this age. Um, and if I don't understand why those things are occurring or how to overcome them, um, I might start to think less about myself. I may start to battle and deal with, those feelings of depression. Likewise, if I feel like from an attachment standpoint, and this is not just attachment with my caregivers, but this is also attachment with my peers, right? Many of the social exchanges and relationships that I have, if I'm not building those strong attachments and I begin to feel more like a loner or feel like I'm struggling to connect with others, is another way in which I might find myself battling with or struggling with some depression. And then lastly, control, some control challenges, self-control challenges. So if I'm not able to properly control and manage my emotions, well, let's face it, if I can't control my emotions, that very well may begin to also have impact on my relationships with those around me. But it also could impact my ability to grow cognitively and to learn. Because if I am easily frustrated when I find myself uh, struggling with a particular subject, I may start to engage in avoidance. And in doing that, that becomes my regular habit. I get frustrated, I avoid the subject, and every time I do that, I fall further and further and further behind, and eventually get to a point where now I'm depressed because, I feel like I'm so far behind my peers. Um, I don't even feel like I fit in anymore. And then lastly, our young adults, ages 18 to 20. All right. Um, from a social development standpoint, we're looking at the importance of friendships and social contacts with friends. Um, I just think about some of my second youngest, just starting her second year of college, but first year being on campus. Man, she is in full bloom in this social development aspect where she is developing a whole new group and set of friends, and just living it up, embracing it. Is kind of exciting to a certain extent to see her, and thankfully, I'm encouraged to see that, while embracing that, being able to trust that she's not going to be easily influenced into perhaps engaging in behaviors and events that are not desirable or something that we would want for her, and hopefully something that she wouldn't want for herself as well. uh, Cognitive and language development, we see our young adults beginning to develop long range goals and plans to achieve them, right? So at this age, 18 to 20, they're in their hopefully first, second, maybe third year of college, and beginning to think about things like career, right? So, I'm going to school. What am I doing after this, right? Let's say they aren't, in college at this range, right? Maybe they went to school and developed a trade and are into their trade, right? Maybe now I'm in my trade and I'm starting to think more long term and saying, is this something that I want to master, right? Like, is this something that I want to get so good at that maybe down the line, right now I'm working for somebody and learning and developing the skills at this trade, but maybe I reach a point where I have my own company, my own business, as it pertains to this trade, and I'm building something for myself, right? Emotional development, the need for closeness and intimacy. Um, and this is closeness and intimacy with not just their peers, but with family and their parents as well. Because at this age, they're growing more and more into themselves, definitely growing more and more independent, um, uh, truly, starting to be more firm in their own identity. Um, and also at a point where they may feel like they can actually contribute to those around them, right? And so you think about your 18 to 20-year-old, have we asked ourselves the question, what can I learn from my 18 to 20-year-old, right? Is there something that they can teach me that I don't know, right? And if they are, how willing am I to embrace that and encourage that, right? That can, speak volumes and do tons of good for our young adults. Because let's face it, as human beings, I think many, if not all of us, at some point want to know that we have something to contribute to those around us. And so at this stage in their age, they are transitioning from a place where they've spent the majority of their lives depending on us to provide their needs and to care for them. And they're now reaching a point where they actually can kind of turn the tables and perhaps do some things for us, right? Are we embracing that? Are we giving opportunity and room for that? Physical development, hopefully young adults at that age are at their peak physical health and performance. Kind of hard to say or see that nowadays with all of the health complications that exist within society and that we're faced with. I kind of think when I think about this bullet point, I'm actually thinking about Bronny James, right? Here it is, this young man who's in this age range who is now he's an NBA player. He's in the NBA, right? So he's expected to be in definitely peak physical health condition or performance, but he has a scare with his heart, right? And is out sometimes. So, we're all vulnerable to physical ailments and have to be mindful of that. But generally speaking, at this young adult age, the example that I just gave with Bronny James, that is something that is expected to not be the norm. That's highly or considerably rare, right? We expect our kids at that age to be more physically fit, and it's fairly easy. The older we get, of course, we have to be mindful of what we eat, what we put in. But at this age, kids seem like they can eat anything and be just fine. And they certainly will. Some challenges and expectations that we want to look out for is the influence game changes for both parent and child, right? And so this kind of goes back to the conversation that I had about contribution and how our young adults at this age may feel like they're able to contribute more and actually educate and teach us some things, right? And so while we are still trying to influence them and guide them at that age, they're also, looking at it as, they should have the ability to influence us as well, right? And again, that goes hand in hand with, are we willing to learn? So do they have that influence? Are we embracing and at times encouraging that influence when it's appropriate and healthy? If not, we might want to consider and be mindful of how that could impact the overall relationship. Okay. Look at that. I got ahead of myself. Relationship health hinges on interdependency. So I already spoke about that. Addictions become more evident as distinct entity problems. Previously with the previous age group, we talked about potentially struggling with depression, maybe even anxiety and things of that nature. And if our children in those two stages aren't learning how to effectively cope with the challenges that they face at that point in time, unfortunately, they may start to engage in substance abuse, right? Let's just face it, at this age, they're in school. They're certainly probably going to their fair share of parties and things like that, many in which alcohol is going to be present. And, it may very well just start off with alcohol consumption, but that can quickly turn into an addiction where they're, uh, engaging in using, alcohol beyond just partying. And now it's a tool to numb whatever emotions that they may be feeling that may cause them to experience depression or anxiety. And then lastly, decision making skills incorporate longer time horizons, right? And so, we already kind of talked about kids this age, starting to think more long term about maybe career, but maybe even thinking about family, right? Do I want to have kids or do I not want to have kids? Do I want to get married? Do I not want to get married? What do I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Um, you know, how soon do I want to retire? How long do I want to actively work? They may start to think about all of these things potentially at that age. But also, more importantly, learning that the decisions that I make now may have consequences and affect me years down the line. And I want to start to think about specifically how those decisions I make now might impact me down the line. All right. So, any questions, comments, feedback?